And we are live. Good evening. Today is Wednesday, June 16th, 2021. I'm your host, Evan George, and welcome to Bostopia Nightly News. Your top stories from today. The Massachusetts Nurses Union has swung left and endorsed both incumbent Julie Mejia and David Halpert for Boston City Council, adding a nice balance between their endorsements of Anissa Savi-George and Erin Murphy. Construction unions and big developers are teaming up in the mayoral race. However, they have not yet endorsed anyone. The blue line is threatened with sea level rise and expected to experience multiple feet of water every time we experience a large storm after the year 2070. Also, COVID-19 impacts the LGBTQ community here in Massachusetts, devastating for mental health. And the Massachusetts nurses at St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester are currently on their, I believe, 101st day of strike. Full solidarity with them. And finally, if you would like to receive a $1 million check from the state government, go get your COVID-19 vaccine now, and I will tell you how to enroll if I decide I want to worsen the odds for myself and my family. But with all of that, thank you all for being here. Let's go right into, let's see, what story to start with. A little bit of a palate cleanser before going into a much heavier topic. And that's going to be Howie Carr. So for those of you who do not know, Howie is a right-wing, I don't know, call him an amateur Rush Limbaugh, that every now and then gets retweets from the president and goes ecstatic about it. A true, again, mini Rush Limbaugh in the Massachusetts sense of it. Completely downplayed the role of COVID-19. However, every now and then, he gets to write whatever these opinion columns are, and he has a gripe against the police, which if anyone has any inside information about why that is, I'd love to hear it. And so Howie starts talking about this new law now, and I just wanted to read it because, I find it fascinating sometimes Howie's bent, because he hates Baker. Baker is far too liberal for him. And here's how he begins. Forget the Holyoke Soldiers Home, the third highest COVID death rate in the nation, the worst unemployment rate in the United States for months on end, the 9,018 dead in nursing homes, which then he puts in parentheses, miraculously reduced to 5,500 overnight. Forget all that, we got ourselves a new lottery here, folks. And he continues with the story that I have had in the back of my mind, but have not at all looked into any of the details. And that is of the death of a high school student. Basically saying that Charlie Baker is using this lottery as a way to deflect attention from, one, how poorly Massachusetts did do during the COVID-19 pandemic, the mistakes that were made by his administration, but also a recent death of a high school student at a graduation party. Continuing now, and I thought this was interesting, wanted to bring it up. He's speaking to the governor. Governor, you may have heard that after the Dedham High graduation earlier this month, a 17-year-old was pulled from the deep end of a pool. It was on property owned by a retired state police detective captain named Jimmy Coughlin, who since 2017 has been collecting a state pension of $131,000, almost $132,000. And so, what I know about this, well, I'm going to continue. The teenagers died, and misdemeanor charges, including furnishing alcohol to a child, have now been filed, although the names of the defendants have not been released. So up to this point, I've heard about this death. I heard that the family was putting pressure to figure out what had happened. And of course, I took it as, to be honest, I saw it passingly. But the fact that this was on the property of a retired state police officer, and then why it was that the police were so slow to charge anyone, obviously that seems to connect some dots. Now I enter the ring. Continuing, I am told that Coughlin at one point was on the security staff of the governor. He unsuccessfully ran for Norfolk County Sheriff last year. His brother was a state rep who became a high-paid lobbyist. My question for the governor is, do you know anybody who was at the fatal Coughlin party? Do you employ anyone who was in Dedham that Sunday morning when the youth was pulled from the pool? And the reason I read the Herald, and every now and then I check out what Howie's talking about, though again, no one should take him in good faith. He's a right-wing lunatic. Is he has a gripe against the police, and he does bring up and make connections between the state police and its internal corruption and the Baker administration. And so the fact that this child died on a retired state police's property and was basically kept secret for quite a while until eventually a misdemeanor charges were filed, I find definitely further evidence of police protecting their own. Probably would not have caught that if it was not for Howie's column, but thank you. And yes, that is how Howie made a name for himself with the Whitey Bulger. But they still let him write these columns. He's still got a show. I mean, it's mostly ads if you ever check it out. I've tried listening to it. It's got to be like 60% ads. If you've ever like watched The View, it's a similar thing. It's just like nonstop, like Viagra medication and I don't know, some sort of health insurance that they're trying to get you to sign off on. And before we go to the video, which I'm very excited about because it's about housing, and I've been in housing debates all day with some folks from Cambridge, something caught my eye this morning, and actually people are tweeting at me now about it to make a correction. And this has to do with, and I have never in my life am I going to be able to get the name down of Tsarnaev. I can't do it. The Boston Marathon bomber, the brother. I'm going to call him the Boston Marathon bomber. If somebody can somehow phonetically message me how to pronounce it, I would appreciate it. But it's beyond me. Actually, I don't want to put that live. All right, I'll check my Twitter later. So the reason I wanted to bring it up is because I guess the federal government is now trying to get the death penalty reinstated, is my understanding. Let's see if I can bring this up. Because the reason I want to talk about this is because originally this morning people were tweeting that Kim Janey wanted to reinstate the death penalty for the bomber. And then people were bashing Kim for it. And then, however, I saw a tweet from hers a few hours ago basically saying that she doesn't want that, anything of the sort. So I was very confused. Some people are trying to clear it up for me now. And whenever I think of the Boston Marathon bomber, I think back on this article. And it actually, I think, deserves me maybe doing a full deep dive episode into it. But that is about the multiple questions of whether or not the bomber was an FBI informant. Whether or not this is another example of the concept referred to as blowback, which is our machinations, our funding of right-wing squads all over the world eventually manifests back in terms of violence against our own internal population, whether directed or undirected. And so this article from April 9th, 2017, Michelle McPhee, goes into really this story and the connections between the brother, the bomber, and the FBI. So it begins with a long story of a village in Russia where, trying to think of the best phrase without falling into stereotypes, but radical Islamic terrorists in Russia were congregated and gunned down by the Russian military. At first, it seems like it has nothing to do with anything we're talking about. However, leaving that same village a few hours before, or at least was in the area, was the Boston Marathon bomber, who is now on his way back to America with somebody paying for the plane ticket. And that kind of now begins the questions of who was this kid and how was he able to travel so easily back and forth between the United States and Russia, though he was on multiple terrorist watch lists? And what were the results that actually led to him bombing the Boston Marathon? I may actually have some pronunciation. The T is silent. Tsarnaev. Tsarnaev. All right. We're going to go with Tsarnaev from my researcher, my intern. Tsarnaev. Now, the timeline, and maybe we'll give this a further read later, because I want to get to the housing stuff, but I just couldn't help but talk about it and bring this article back up. Tsarnaev? I've already forgotten. So in March 2011, I'm going to read it out loud for the podcasters. A Russian counterterrorism agent warns the FBI about, let's get the pronunciation again. I'll put it on speaker. Tsarnaev. A Russian counterterrorist agent warns the FBI about Tsarnaev. A few months later, the FBI officially closes their investigation on him. A few months later after that, the bodies of 3 men with connections to Tsarnaev are found nearly decapitated in his apartment in Waltham. No charges are filed. Nothing is made of it, which seems odd. It seems odd that someone who was formerly investigated by the FBI for terrorism, 3 nearly decapitated bodies are found in his apartment, and there are no arrests made on him. In October, a month later, Russian officials again warned U.S. intelligence about Tsarnaev's radical jihadist rhetoric, and his name is added to multiple terrorist watch lists. A few months later, now January 2012, despite being on the watch list, Tsarnaev is allowed to fly from the United States to Russia, where again, 7 months after that, a radical group that it seems like he was in contact with all end up dead. Someone mysteriously then pays to have Tsarnaev come back to the United States. Now 2012. They open up an application for citizenship, and the state starts to process it. However, in January of 2013 now, his citizenship is being delayed. And it's not then on that April 15th of 2013 that he and his brother carry out the Boston Marathon bombing. And I just realized that in me doing it, I shut off my TikTok people. I apologize. And so from this timeline, and maybe I'll read the book again. From this timeline, it is very clear that there was a connection between the FBI and the Boston Marathon bomber, that multiple instances of murder were swept under the rug, that someone mysteriously paid for his travel to Russia and back, and that it was, and this was somewhat reported on, the multiple delays in his citizenship, which maybe were part of the carrot to get him to be an informant, to get him to do whatever it was the FBI or intelligence services were asking him to do. And it was maybe that federal government's reneging on that promise of citizenship that eventually he snapped. This was a very, very brief overview. The fact that he was back in the news, I just wanted to bring it up and share it because of how much it is lost from our memory. I've also been on a Cold War kick and listened to a 5-part episode on the Boston Marathon bomber, so I couldn't help it. I'm sorry, about the JFK assassination. So a little bit out there for me, but I definitely wanted to bring it up. And now, let's go into the fun part. Something that I've been very excited about, which is to finally listen to the Boston mayoral race forum on housing. And as I said before, I just spent hours today, unnecessarily debating multiple YIMBYs from Cambridge on housing policy. So this is all right, fresh in my mind. And let's see if our mayoral candidates can keep up when I am in an angry mood about the concept of housing. But first, let's find where we can take off from.
On community building, candidate forum.
Ooh, Karen sounds awesome. I'm just skipping over their introductions. We don't need that.
My name is Karen Chen.
Karen's great.
Thank you for being here this evening, and welcome to our last of a 6-series candidate forum. And really want to thank all the candidates for being here this evening, and sharing with us your vision and plan to address racial, gender, and economic justice in our city.
And before we dive into the forum, we'd like to give a big thank you to the Forum Series Planning Committee, including the NAAC Boston Branch, NAACP, Boston Branch, the Brazilian Workers Center, SEIU 32BJ, New England United for Justice, Boston Teachers Union, Greater Boston Labor.
Okay.
And before we hear from our candidates today, we have 2 artists.
Well, thank you for the subscription.
Sisters in a movement.
Buenas. When we stop playing the game, say what you want to say.
Absolutely no disrespect to the right to the city vote people. I'm just trying to figure out where the questions begin. Oh yeah, okay, here we go. Here's what they do. They have people kind of calling with the questions.
My name is Tatiana Ramos. I live in Dorchester. I'm currently working for New England United for Justice. But before we get into any of that, I definitely just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to be on this webinar with you guys and open up for you guys by performing for you today.
I was doing a performance. All right, we're going to listen to the performance. Why not?
My mother wrote it a long time ago. She wrote it on a true story. My family actually had to encounter a drive-by shooting before I was born. So I chose this poem because of all the chaos that's been happening in the community lately. And I feel like it definitely connects back to accountability. And we as a community sometimes don't take responsibility for our actions when we should. I feel like instead of normalizing, encouraging each other, and uplifting each other, we're normalizing hate, pain, suffering, and violence in general. And it shouldn't be that way. I definitely also feel like Blink of an Eye speaks on how sometimes things start, and when they do start, we feel like we want to wake up from a nightmare, but we can't wake up from it because it's reality. We were standing on the corner, chilling with our friends, just thinking about the day when all the violence will come to an end. All of a sudden, a black car did a drive-by. Bodies started dropping in just the blink of an eye. Some people started running, trying not to get hit, while others were just standing around having a fit. Some of the neighbors were yelling, most of the babies were crying, but all the mothers were saying, "I don't want my baby dying." When the police came, the shooters had fled the scene, but the mothers of the victims were hoping it was all a dream. On the way to the hospital, the mothers cried out in vain. They were all asking God why their kids had to suffer this pain. But one woman said it had to do with drugs or guns, while the other woman said, "My kid was an innocent one." Some of the kids were parents, so their babies wouldn't understand. Why'd they kill my daddy if he was a good man? But their mama couldn't tell them that their father was a thug. She also couldn't tell them that their father sold drugs. Looking back on this now, I thought I was going to scream. Thank God it wasn't real. I'm glad it was all a dream.
Okay, very good.
So I want to thank you, Tati and Fitz. So as we
are answering for our members to
still going
and move forward.
Come on, what are the questions?
Surveillance communities have the right treatment. And we'll have a timer. I think everyone, you don't get cut off in the middle of a sentence.
Thank you for reviewing that, Karen. Now we're going to begin with opening statements. Each candidate gets 2 minutes to speak.
Oh God, definitely not listening to opening statements.
Transportation.
Yeah, you're all great. Fantastic. It's nice to meet you.
Question is, do you support
Thank you. Here we go.
Abolishing PBDA, Boston's Planning and Development Agency, used to be known as BRA? And the second part of this question is, how will you bring more community control to the planning and development? So we'll start with Mr. Barrows.
The correct answer on this should be yes, I support abolishing the BPDA because you must have a more democratic process of development in Boston. Let's see how many people hit that.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate the question. I've spent years, 13 years as executive director of the Dulles Neighbor Initiative, but many years before that as a community organizer working in my neighborhood using tools of the then BRA and now BPDA to help make sure that our neighborhood worked for us, to help build housing, to help assemble land that we put in our land trust, to help, in fact, organize our land trust. So I do not support the abolishing of the BPDA. I support the reform of the BPDA to make sure that the BPDA is working for the community, to make sure that the BPDA is, in fact, as it was for us, a partner with the community and helps move the community plan forward. The BPDA can do that, has done that in the past, and it's about leadership, it's about direction, and as
I mean, again, he shouldn't be in the race. I don't mind interrupting or maybe even skipping him. The idea that at some point in the BPDA's history, which I think it was like reformed not too long ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, that at some point in the last 10 to 15 years, the BPDA was this beautiful, transparent, out in the community, actually making decisions based upon what the feedback they received. That's complete nonsense. Again, the agency was literally just like renamed not too long ago. So there was no period where the Boston BPDA had any sort of organic relationship with the community and took their feedback. And I think they're mostly just going to split hairs over reform versus abolish. But
Mayor,
ridiculous.
I will make sure that the planning at the BPDA with community is what leads. And so we will reorganize the hierarchy of the BPDA to make sure that planning is dictating and development is helping to implement plans. And as mayor, I will make sure that we use all of the tools of the BPDA at the disposal of communities so that we can have implementation. We can't just have plans sitting on the shelf. We've got to make sure that we're using all of the tools that the BPDA has.
Okay, and my follow-up would be, what are the tools the BPDA has that they're not currently using? And I promise you, and I will vote for him if he can't answer that question.
So that our communities can implement their vision and their plans.
Thank you. Next will be Councilor Campbell.
Thank you, and I just got a message from one of the interpreters to maybe talk a little louder, so I'm going to do that right now, Anna. So thank you. So the short answer is no. I think there is value in having the BPDA, and I have had a whole host of conversations with a wide range of stakeholders, including hardworking city employees that work in that department, residents who are frustrated with the lack of transparency, accountability in that department. And so in developing my housing plan, have put out specifics on what I would do to transform that agency so that it is more accountable and transparent. One is releasing information. Right now, it's difficult to get information. What does it mean to actually post when the meetings are, the plans, the proposals, way in advance so residents don't have to figure out how to find it? The second
Okay, I'll let her finish.
is I would establish an office of civic engagement so that we're not just engaging the civic leaders and those who attend the meetings, but everyone, the abutters, having a multilingual, multicultural, and culturally competent engagement process. I would separate out planning, which is critically important. And I would also make sure that the planning is separate and apart from the development. There is also a need for a cultural shift. This is what employees and many folks say all the time. There is a lack of diversity in that agency. I would change that. And cultural shift, sometimes you're like, what the heck does that mean? So in addition to creating more diversity, also making sure that this agency has accountability levers in place for us to hold folks accountable to all these commitments. Thank you.
Okay, and they're all going to say this, increased engagement. The idea that if the BPDA just let more people aware of the neighborhood meetings when the developers tell you what the project is and then you're allowed to comment on it, that is completely insufficient. The idea that all we need to do is let people vent and talk more, but they do not actually have control over the development process. They do not get to make the decisions. We'll make it easier for you to complain about them. We'll give you more of a forum, more of a microphone where you can vent your frustration over being displaced or gentrified out of your home or community, but you still, the actual power, the actual people who get to decide what gets built and what doesn't get built, they are the ones who get to decide it. You are not allowed in this room. And unless you were addressing that, and Andrea ended it with accountability structures, what does that mean? That if the community voices opposition to something, that then the city council has now the new power to reverse or approve at the final step of a development process? I doubt that's what they're talking about.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Councilor Asabi George.
This should be good.
Thank you very much for the question, and I'll start my own timer here. I do not support the dismantling of the BPDA. I do support breaking up the BPDA and creating an independent public office of planning.
Well, what's the difference? Honestly, if it's, I don't support abolishing, but I support breaking up and doing something different. Then and that is just more of a semantic.
The creation of a separate planning office that follows a forward-thinking but inclusive effort to plan development in our city, of our city. I've also introduced legislation calling to reform the notification process to ensure that residents have advance notice of developments and have the opportunity to express their concerns and participate in the development, the growth, the changes in their neighborhood.
Participate in. They don't get to decide. They don't get the power. They don't get to actually have any power within it, but they get to participate. We're going to give out ribbons.
In their communities and just next door. A planning office under my leadership would prioritize the needs, the wants, and the realities of our neighborhoods and its employees, and make sure that it's very much reflective of our city and the needs of our neighborhoods. I think it's really important that as we do this work to build our city, to grow our city, that we are doing it in partnership with community and in partnership with those that are looking to build our city. On the council, I've also introduced legislation to increase transparency and accountability around that development process, asking us to create publicly available developer profiles to increase the amount of information that's available to our residents.
See, again, they will make it easier to access the information about the projects, but you will not have the power to decide what projects get built in your community. You will have more engagement, you'll have more participation, but still the actual levers of what gets to be built in the city will be apart from you. If that is part of any of the candidates' vision for what to do for housing, then they are just bullshitting.
We need to make sure that we are fully aware.
No. 90 seconds. Bam.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mayor Jamie.
Thank you so much. My approach is to reimagine the BPDA, and that starts with an understanding that planning has to drive development and not the other way around. So what does that mean? One, we have to ensure that our planning processes are equitable and from the bottom up, with a special focus on neighborhood level planning and design that lifts our communities up. We have to make sure that they're safe, healthy, and empowering living environments. Number two, that means planning is driving the developments and the negotiation processes clearly and transparently. Right now, that is one of the biggest complaints, that these processes are not transparent. We have to make sure that there's transparency in setting the goals and that they are informed by what the community wants are and what is needed for individual neighborhoods. Number three, we have to develop a clear set of citywide and neighborhood land use policies that add value and strengthen the fabric of all neighborhoods. And number four, we have to propose a modernized community-based or community value-based zoning code that ensures that our neighborhood plans are in fact equitable. And we have to do this again with and for community. Thank you.
I can't tell you a single policy she just advocated for. Can't tell you a single thing. No idea.
Mayor Jamie. Next, we'll have Representative Santiago.
Thanks, Karen. I support community-centered reform of the BPDA. We have a situation right now in this city in Boston where we have inadequate planning, and we have outdated zoning codes. Boston currently, from my opinion, still is a develop first, plan later paradigm that is not benefiting the people of the city. This creates a piecemeal, project-based system that is not working for the city. We see its impact on places like the Seaport, and we're currently experiencing that on the waterfront. We need to focus on creating a vision for the city of Boston that making sure that planning dictates development.
I wonder if they're going to ask any of these people the question is, would you support a pause on large developments until we have a plan in place? Because right now they are all criticizing correctly that we have a project-based system where there is no overall blueprint or plan for the city, and basically allowing the small board to say yes or no what development on each separate plot, completely independent of any overall vision. So then why are we still allowing, and they all gripe about the Seaport, so why are we still allowing construction to be done at the Seaport? There is still construction being done right now. Why don't we pause and halt all of that until we can have a plan? Would you support that for the neighborhoods that you're saying this is so fundamental? My guess is they would all say no.
The BPDA must have a planning department. I'm committed to making that happen. It's going to be planning that emphasizes equity, anti-displacement, green development, and environmental justice at its core. As a former community organizer myself who spent time living and working in some of the poorest
I love how
communities
both John
in the world,
Barros and John Santiago have now decided to describe themselves as community organizers. That's funny. Never said that before.
It has a lot of voice in this. We need an article edit process that reflects that. It was created in 1996. It needs to be reformed. It needs to be updated. It needs to be transparent. It needs to be one that we hold the city and developers accountable. And I'm committed to making sure, as the next mayor of Boston, that we do that, and that we do that as soon as possible, because we can't wait. The city of Boston can't wait any longer.
Still just a nothing answer.
Next, we'll have Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Karen. It's looking like I'm going to be the only candidate to say yes to this one, and I said yes a long time ago, building on the advocacy of generations of activists who have been lifting up this development structure
Strong
as
intro.
a core
Strong intro.
force in deepening inequities across our city, racial injustices and economic inequities. We know that we are still operating off of an agency structure that is 60 years old, that first produced the disaster of the West End, displacing nearly 20,000 families out of Boston and setting a national story and example for why this wasn't working. And today has still produced examples like the Seaport, where we see inequities. Part of the city that is climate vulnerable, doesn't reflect the diversity of our city, is far from transportation access. We need to do better. In this moment of a tremendous displacement crisis, where Boston is growing, but that growth is not shared among our residents, it is time to dismantle a structure that is not accountable to the people, doesn't have oversight. We need to move to a system where Boston residents are directly planning, creating the zoning and new rules that ground affordability, resiliency, food access, where our schools should be in a holistic, intersectional way, so that we can build that city that we dream of, so that we can be in each neighborhood and connected together, resilient across the board.
All right, strong answer. I want Michelle to talk more about that second part. What would that structure look like? What would a democratized vision for planning and development look like? But being that direct and pointing out just how disastrous this agency, and again, it's been rebranded multiple times, has been, very effective. Good job. Way to rebound after I was bashing you for the police union forum.
Right, now for the next question. Inclusionary Development Policy, or IDP, is currently 13%. What are your plans for increasing the percentage of IDP in your first 100 days? Please include what percentage you plan to increase to and what unit threshold you plan to require.
Okay, so IDP policy, Inclusionary Development Policy, I believe it was originally started in 1971 in Virginia. Somebody can Google me if they want. And what that is to basically tell private developers that if you want to build at a certain size, you must make available a certain percentage of your units for affordable units, meaning not market rate. That they'll have to be subsidized either from the city level, the state level, or you, the developer themselves, must subsidize that property. And for Boston, it is, I believe, if the construction is over a certain square footage, if it's 10 or more units, you have to have 13% affordable. So if you have 100 units in your development, 13 of them need to be set at affordable levels. And now it'll come up later what the AMI, area median income, needs to be for those at 13%. And most recently, the Boston City Council has, through the state legislature, been empowered to change that number. And they've gone back and forth with the BPDA over who gets to actually now create that new percentage. I've been saying that using what happened at the Seaport as a model, developers are going to be okay with 20%, which means that we need to be pushing for 60%. Because even then, the percentage that is labeled as affordable is not actually affordable. The percentages they use to determine if it's affordable or not for you are almost double, sometimes triple, the actual area median income. And that's why this stuff gets tricky in the language. But let's see how much people want for over 13%. I have a feeling, again, because the Seaport developers were okay with 20, everyone is going to be okay with 20 if they give a number.
Again, each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. And we will start with Councillor Kim.
Thank you, Andres, for the question. And I have spent a lot of time on this very issue. And frankly, it's an issue that's right before the City Council right now in Councillor Edwards' committee. And so there has been a back and forth on what that could look like. I have committed to, in my housing plan currently, to expand citywide increase in IDP to 20%.
Oh, what did I say? I called it. Did not know that ahead of time. Called it from the gate.
It's like the Seaport, South End, Back Bay, for a higher percentage, given what the economic numbers look like in those communities. I also am pushing for, in my plan, to have more on-site building occur, not simply to push for developers to put money into the fund, but also it's bigger than IDP, right? There are other financial tools that we need to be using in order to create more affordable housing. I'm really proud that my first piece of legislation on the council was a CPA, and it's generating millions of dollars for affordable housing. I would keep pushing for a large percentage of that to go to affordable housing. In my plan, I talk about
I don't know what that acronym is.
And this tool that can be used for some of the larger projects to expand, to transfer some of these rights to some of our community-based developers and smaller developers as a way to allow them and help them, assist them in building more affordable housing and being creative in how they do that. Thank you.
And then the only other thing Andrea brought up that I just want to make sure people know about is the concept of on-site. Because what sometimes happens is a developer will say, okay, we'll give you your 13%, but we're not going to have those affordable units on our property because we don't want, the poors intermingling and taking the same elevator as the wealthy people we want to bring in. So we will instead purchase a different building over there, and that is where you'll get your 13%. Andrea is correct that we want to push them to have on-site IDP. Even though there's a funny debate going on in Dorchester about that because one of the major developments is basically in a flood zone. So some people are saying that we should allow them to have off-site because we don't want the affordable units to be flooded. However, as I normally tell people, if there's going to be a flood, you want to be next to the rich people because they're the ones who are going to be able to get to dry land. And so we still want people to be close together.
Thank you. Next, we'll be having Councilor Asaibi George.
They're all
I thank you for
different
the question. I think
volumes.
it's so important that as a city and certainly as mayor, that I'm working to create better paths to home ownership, to build more affordable and more truly affordable housing, and focus on.
Also, the pathway to home ownership is mostly a lie. It's a diversion. I support using a small part of it as part of a larger policy towards housing, but the idea that we will ever have housing on scale to make it so that within an urban environment, within a city, you're going to have pathway to home ownership as like an actual tool. It's just not going to work. You can't do it on scale. All it does is give a couple more people an extra lottery ticket, an extra chance. And normally the people who qualify for such programs are basically already on the cusp of home ownership. You're not hitting the most vulnerable populations.
Creating opportunities for generational wealth. We know that home ownership plays a very direct role in creating that generational wealth and creating access to home ownership across our city and every.
All right, questions on IDP. Come
I
on.
strongly support the creation of more affordable housing and workforce housing for working families, for our seniors, for those living in poverty. And right now, we know Boston's housing stock is lacking, and we need to be sure to be building the housing that will enable Bostonians to live in the city that they've contributed so much to. We need to make sure that as we look to create that more affordable housing, especially housing for our seniors, especially housing for our families, especially housing for our residents who are living with very low income.
It's possible Anissa doesn't know what IDP is.
So when we think about IDP, when we think about
There we go.
zoning, when we think about the percentages, it's certainly important for us to look to move to increase that 13%. But we also have to look to make sure that we are finding that sweet spot, that nexus between affordability and the number of units and making sure that it's continued to be created over time. I think we can do that at 20.
In a 90-second answer, she started talking about IDP, which the question was directed towards, with 15 seconds to go, instantly skipped over it, and then started to address it when she got muted. Way to run out the clock. And to the person with the TikTok, what city do you live in? Because I guarantee you actually probably do live near affordable housing and you're not aware of it.
Thank you. Sorry. Next, we'll be having Mayor Janey.
Thank you so much for this question. I am actually looking at this right now with my Chief of Housing, Sheila Dillon. This is an opportunity for us to create more mixed income development. And too often we have failed to do just that when affordable units are often placed off-site and not on-site. We need to look at both, making sure that when we need to invest in neighborhoods that need more affordable housing, that we're doing just that. And when there are opportunities to create mixed income development rather than another neighborhood that is very segregated by income and race, that we are taking advantage of that. Clearly, the current system is not working. We are creating too many opportunities for developers not to do the right thing, come right under that threshold, build big units in terms of the number, in terms of density, that are not meeting the needs. We are also, in addition to looking at the number of units and percentages, we're looking at square footage so that we can build more family housing for families, so that they can stay put and not be displaced.
These people
from the
love
city.
to run out the clock
Too
on this
often
question.
housing, is not meeting the needs of working families, and we have an opportunity now to do better in the city of Boston. That is what I am doing.
Just say you don't want to put a hard number on your IDP policy.
Thank you for the question. Look, IDP and linkage fees have historically been great tools to capture revenue and to reinvest it into affordable housing. It's why I was very proud that as a state representative that me and colleagues led the fight up there that very last day of the budget to get it done, to allow Boston to do this. And I really want to give a shout out once to the advocates who were on the, I think Karen was on there as well, on a Zoom right before that debate day to get the job done, because that advocacy played an important role in allowing us to pass that. By passing these policies, we allowed a 42% increase in leakage fees and the ability to codify IDP. But it's just a start, right? We need to build on that work. We need to improve these tools and we need to provide more affordable housing opportunities to our residents. And it's again, that's why I was proud to be one of the leaders to do that on Beacon Hill. And I support raising linkage fees, and making sure that we finally end.
Right now, we're not talking about raising linkage fees. We're talking about IDP.
Parking. And as mayor, I will end that exemption and to raise more revenue. And I also believe that we should be looking ways to increase that 13% requirement. We need more affordable housing, and we have the tools to make it a reality. It's important that the stakeholders be at the table and get this done. I'm committed to also thinking outside the box. We have to have more tools on the table to increase our.
What percentage of IDP do you think is acceptable and necessary?
I'm committed to doing that.
Thank you, Representative. Next, we're going to be having Councilor Wu.
Oh, I feel ridiculous.
Thank you, Andres. To know how much of a loophole or impact this is creating, you just have to go look at the ZBA agenda. On almost any given week to week, there are, especially in neighborhoods like East Boston, an influx of 9-unit buildings being proposed to ask for those variances because that's right under the threshold that you need to add to that affordability. And so I would propose the city of Boston really trying to close that loophole and make sure the thresholds are closer to the reality, to have a 20% minimum start, to work to ensure that as our economy recovers and as we are shifting back into a more fully reopened business and development sector, that we can increase it from 20% on up, and that we're dropping the threshold to start with buildings more than 6 units, which matches other ways that the city is categorizing buildings and our building stock across the board. This will better match development in our neighborhoods and the need for us to have, again, going back to the last question, a plan that works for everyone, that connects our neighborhoods to each other and ensures that we are not just pushing people out. And the last thing I want to say is that IDP is not the solution to affordability. We will never get enough affordable housing just by leaning on 20%, 30%. It will never be enough. We need to generate sources for funding for creating more affordable units, including through the city's capital budget and other revenue sources.
3 points. 1, you should never start with 20% as a floor. Again, you always want to start with the highest number. So Michelle stating 20% and then trying to negotiate up, that's not how negotiations work. You start with what you want, and then you basically double or triple it, and that is what you enter into negotiation with, and then go down from there. The second thing about linkage fees, I wanted to look up the correct number. So that's basically just a payment that if a commercial property or just a development wants to build a massive 100,000 square foot or higher, they have to pay a certain amount per square foot into the city, and that sometimes goes to affordable housing, that goes to other infrastructure projects. And the third point that she made, which is absolutely correct, is that we cannot IDP our way out of this. IDP, as I said before, was created in the 1970s to basically replace public housing, to say that we'll let the market, we'll let private developers, we'll try to incentivize them to actually provide affordable housing. It does not work. All we are trying to do through IDP is get as much concessions as we can to what is already a failed system. So good on Michelle for acknowledging that, but you gotta start high. I don't want to hear about the floors. Tell me the ceilings, and we negotiate this, that is the floor.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Mr. Barros.
Andres, thank you. IDP is a very important tool, and I've spent years chasing developers that have started with 9 units, and then a couple of months later they're putting in new applications, and before you know it, in a small area in a neighborhood they've built 19, 20 something units. There is a loophole, and we've got to get in and understand both how many units we're going to build, but also where they can build it and what the period before they can build more units will be. We need to close those loopholes, and then we need to drop it to 5. In fact, I think once you go to 5, we should be talking about what the affordability looks like.
So what he's talking about now, maybe I mentioned it, is that for Boston's affordable housing, it's 10 or more units. You become subject to the IDP policy. So he started talking about how, so some developers just build 9 units then to try to skirt it. He's setting it at 5. I actually like this direction. I'm not going to bash him for it. I would set it maybe a little bit lower, but he's acknowledging something which is accurate. So there you go, John.
We also need to make sure that we are looking at the percentage. We've got to pay attention to what our real estate market looks like when we come out of the pandemic. But in that hot housing market that we saw, I think we can look at bringing it up to 20%. But we do need to be careful.
See how they're all settling on 20%, and that is already what a Texas billionaire who just purchased a whole new neighborhood of Boston said is acceptable, and that is what they're all beginning as saying, yeah, that's what we should aim for. Absolutely pathetic.
It started to soften our market. And as we look at it, we just need to make sure that we're not, crippling our ability to build more affordable housing.
Is that the?
Thank you for your
That's everyone,
answers.
right?
For the second question now, we're moving on to round 3.
All right, we're gonna pause it there. We're not gonna listen to round 3 for tonight. Maybe tomorrow. There's a lot of stuff at the Boston City Council I want to get to, and so I'll definitely. We'll see. Maybe we'll do this one tomorrow. Maybe we'll save the second half for next week. I'm gonna say goodbye to the Facebook, TikTok. No, not TikTok. I save you for last.